The GFS model is still persisting on the idea that we're going to see a tropical storm just off the Central American coast as early as next week. Taking a look at the GFS model, we do see that there is a decent amount of convection going on right over South America as well as Central America. However, the GFS model still expects at least a small piece of moisture to move northward and potentially have the possibility of developing into Tropical Storm Bret. Continuing to move forward with the forecast, we have seen a dramatic shift when it comes to the trajectory of this storm system, where we do see that as early as Saturday, June 17th, we do see a large area of convection just off the coast of Honduras and Nicaragua. So you definitely need to pay close attention to the possibility of heavy rain right up along the Central American coast. But the thing you need to be more aware about is the possibility this develops into tropical storm, which could potentially bring more impacts when it comes to gusty winds as well as heavy rainfall. And we do see the millibar pressure drop down to 1,003 millibars, but the major change we've seen with this run of the GFS model is that it wants to bring the storm a lot further westward. So I did mention yesterday that there could be a trend where the GFS model is now beginning to enhance the ridging right over the northern Caribbean and into the Gulf of Mexico, and that trend could lead to this storm moving a little bit further westward and interacting more with land. And that wouldn't necessarily be good news for Central America, because of course if this storm system were to move closer to land, you'll experience a lot more heavy rainfall. However, the good news that would come out of this storm moving towards further westward is that we wouldn't see it reach its peak potential intensity compared to if it were to move a little bit further eastward and have more time over the open Caribbean waters. So that's certainly good news that we're less likely to see this storm develop into potentially a strong tropical storm, or potentially even more than that if it were to move a little bit further eastward. However, the GFS model, despite the enhanced amount of land interaction, does expect a tropical storm to develop by this weekend and into early next week. And we see this make landfall right around Belize by the Tuesday timeframe. This is within the 7-day point, and it's bringing heavy rainfall throughout just south of the Yucatan Peninsula. Guatemala is getting involved, Belize, as well as portions of El Salvador. You're getting involved with very heavy rainfall, and don't rule out the possibility of gusty winds if this storm system were to develop like the GFS model is forecasting. However, we could continue to see this trend where the GFS model is now going to begin to lean more to what the European model been stating over the past several days, where the European model is expecting a much stronger omega block to exist right over the Gulf of Mexico. And what omega block is pretty much a strong ridge that's right over a certain area of pretty much throughout the entire Earth. So since we're going to see an omega block right over the Gulf of Mexico, that could lead to the moisture moving a little bit further westward to the point where we're less likely to see this develop into a tropical storm. And if this trend continues with the GFS model, then there could be a higher possibility at this point that a tropical storm will not develop. And we also need to keep in mind that the GFS model always tends to have too strong of a bias in developing tropical cyclones, even under less conducive environments. Even when it's very early in the hurricane season, we tend to see at least one or potentially a couple of fantasy storms where the GFS model expects this monster storm to develop even during the early part of the hurricane season. So we definitely need to take the GFS model with a higher grain of salt, especially since now we're seeing that trend lean more to the European model, where the European model isn't developing any tropical storms. So I will say that it's becoming less likely that we're going to see Tropical Storm Bret just off of Central America based on the trend we're seeing. But who knows, maybe the GFS model could still reverse the trend, bring the storm a little bit further eastward, and the European model will also cave into that forecast. But I'll say it's looking less likely at this point. It seems like the GFS model, after each of the recent runs, has been leaning more to the European model. So there is a less likely chance of tropical storm development just off the Central American coast. However, Central America, you still need to pay close attention to the possibility of heavy rainfall if the storm system and this area of moisture were to move a little bit further westward. So here's what the European model been forecasting for this next potential tropical storm. So if we were to, or lack thereof of a potential tropical storm, so if we were to continue to move forward with the European models forecasts, we do see that. Let me show you guys a 12Z run because it shows a more long-term forecast. So taking a look at the 12Z run of the European model, we see that the European model doesn't really develop much of anything. It does bring an enhanced amount of moisture just off of Central America on the Saturday time frame around 120 hours out. But we do see that it doesn't really develop into anything because, again, the ridging is just too strong just on the north of this piece of moisture. So this area of moisture moves over land before it could really develop a well-organized center of circulation and really absorb the very warm Caribbean waters. So we don't see a tropical storm out of this area of moisture, but we do see enhanced rainfall right over the Central American countries, especially in the higher elevations. So make sure to watch out for that possibility of flooding in many of these areas around Central America. And we still, even though the GFS model has been trending to the European model, we still can't rule out that the GFS model still could potentially reverse its forecast and bring a tropical storm to the Caribbean. It's a little bit less likely than before, but I definitely wouldn't rule it out because GFS model is still a very reliable model. But and also, even if this specific area of moisture doesn't develop into a tropical storm, there's going to be a multitude of areas where convective activity will be enhanced. That's going to move over South America over the next several weeks, most likely. So one of these area pieces of convective energy could potentially move over the Caribbean, and that could be our next potential tropical storm in the more long-term future. And of course, during the early part of the hurricane season, we tend to see Central American gyre build, which has been responsible for a multitude of tropical cyclones developing in the month of June. So we're definitely going to pay close attention to this area over the next several weeks, because I definitely wouldn't be surprised if at least some sort of tropical cyclone develops within that time period. Of course, a key factor that I've been talking to you guys about over the past several days regarding the possibility if this storm will develop or not is the amount of ridging that will be located over the Gulf of Mexico. I mentioned in my previous videos that if the ridging is a little bit too strong, we're going to see this area of moisture move a little bit too far west, and that wouldn't allow it to move north enough to have enough time over the warm Caribbean waters to necessarily develop. So we see the moisture move towards Central America, and that land interaction will diminish any possibility we'll see Tropical Storm Bret in the Caribbean if the ridging was a little bit stronger. But if it were a little bit weaker and we see this noticeable trough dip move a little bit further southward, that would steer the moisture northward, and that would allow the moisture to have more time to lower the pressure along the surface and, of course, enhance the possibility of Tropical Storm Bret developing. As of right now, it seems like the GFS model expects just enough of weakness in ridging for this area of moisture to move northward and still develop into a tropical storm. However, we've been seeing a trend where this ridge is becoming stronger than the GFS model initially anticipated. So we're seeing this area of moisture move a little bit further westward more than anticipated, which means that it's going to deal with more land interaction and it's less likely to develop into the strong tropical storm or hurricane that the previous GFS model runs were initially anticipating. We're going to need to see if this trend continues. It seems like it will, so we're less likely going to see Tropical Storm Bret develop in the Western Caribbean, but we still need to be aware of this because it's still it's still a possibility we'll see Tropical Storm Bret, just not as high as before. Another factor we're going to need to take a look at is the upper level winds over the Caribbean. And like I said, there's going to be a small area in the Western Caribbean where the wind shear will primarily be light to moderate for this storm to have a higher possibility of developing. And since this storm is likely to move further westward, we're less likely to see stronger wind shear, which could potentially benefit this storm if it maintains the right balance between land interaction and how much wind shear it deals with, because it can't move too far west or else it'll deal with too much land interaction to necessarily have a good chance of developing it into a tropical storm, even though the wind shear would be a little bit lighter further westward. However, it can't move a little bit too far east either, because if it were to do that, it'll encounter the stronger upper level winds that would be located further eastward in the Caribbean, and that would inhibit its potential of developing into a tropical storm as well. So we're going to need to see where exactly this moves. If it moves in that right area where it won't deal with a lot of land interaction or wind shear, this could potentially be a stronger tropical storm, but it seems like the trend is leaning towards bringing this closer to land. So I will say the chance of tropical storm formation is less likely, despite the light to moderate wind shear that exists a little bit further westward. Here's a look at the water vapor imagery. We do see that there's a strong upper level low located right over the southeast, bringing a pretty large area of dry air right over the Gulf of Mexico. And we do see plenty of convection going on around Central America as well as South America, as some of this convection is expected to move further northward. And the forecast is so uncertain regarding if this moisture could develop into a tropical storm, but it's looking like the chances of this developing into a tropical storm are less likely than before, but we're still going to need to wait and see how the computer models change our forecast. In terms of what the National Hurricane Center is stating over the next 7 days, we do see that they're not expecting any tropical cyclone, at least possibility within the next week, as it seems like the National Hurricane Center is detecting that the GFS model is a little bit too optimistic in developing a tropical storm, as it's now beginning to lean more and more to what the European model been stating, which is not developing a tropical storm. But don't be surprised if we do see this change, if the GFS model somehow maintains its forecast. And here's a global tropics hazards outlook over the next few weeks. So for the week of June 14th, we do see that conditions are expected to be drier than average for the most part over the Gulf of Mexico, of course, thanks to an upper level low that's located right over Florida. And then moving on to week 3, the week of June 21st, we do see an enhanced amount of precipitation is expected over Central America, which could enhance the possibility of tropical cyclone formation thanks to the gyre going on. But I'll keep you guys updated. So if we were to see Tropical Storm Bret develop, it'll develop somewhere around this area. It'll develop very close to Central America, so you need to be aware of the possibility of flooding, whether this develops into tropical storm or not, since plenty of moisture is expected to move over these areas. And it seems like the chance is diminishing for a tropical storm. It still certainly exists. The GFS model is still a reliable model, but it's leaning more to the European model at this point. But I'll keep you guys updated for any changes over the next several days. But that's it for now, guys, and I thank you guys for watching.